hover tanks, widges, and VTOLs all risk side slipping if they use flanking speed and attempt to change direction in one turn. Throughout the remainder of this video, if I use the term unit refers to either hover tanks, widges, or VTOLs for the purpose of explaining how side slipping works. Slide slipping works pretty much the same for all these units, but some subtle differences exist for widges and VTOLs, which I will get into. But let's start by explaining the basics of side slipping with hover tanks. This will be our demonstrational hover tank for today, because I just painted it and want to show it off. Let's say our hover tank declares that it will use flanking speed, and it flanks on 1, 2, 3, 4. And once it gets here, the hover tank, since it's only one level tall and is in front of a level 1 hill, the hover tank doesn't want to crash into the level 1 hill, so it changes facing and wishes to progress forward. But before it progresses forward, it must make a driving skill roll and pass, or else the hover tank will keep progressing in this direction and collide into the level 1 hill. We call this a side slip, because the hover tank will slip even though it's facing sideways. Now let's say that this hover tank has a driving skill of 5, and we roll. We got a 4. Accordingly, the hover tank crashes into the hill and takes collision damage. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to cover collision damage right now. I am sorry. I hope to cover collision damage in a future video. Now, of course, if the hover tank had passed that driving skill roll, the hover tank could then move on and continue its flanking throughout the map without colliding. Widges work slightly differently. Now, it looks like this widge is at level 1. However, widges ride on a cushion of air, so widges actually are at level 2, supposing that we're on level 0 ground. So when this widge flanks over here, it actually ends up moving to level 3 in this case, because it's 2 levels above level 1. And so if the widge moved here and wanted to change facing and turn for some reason, but then failed the driving skill roll, the widge would move up here and continue on. Let's talk about VTOLs now. Let's say this VTOL flies at an elevation of 4, and it decides to flank, and it flanks right up to here, in front of this level 5 mountain. The VTOL does not want to crash into the mountain, so the VTOL changes facing and wishes to progress on in this direction to avoid the mountain. The VTOL would have to make a driving skill roll. Say the skill is 5. And the VTOL passes and continues on. But if the VTOL failed that roll, the VTOL would then collide into the mountainside, and that would be bad. Now you might think that because it's a VTOL, surely it can just change elevation and go an elevation level up or 2, and get up and avoid everything. But no, once the driving skill roll has failed, the VTOL does not have an opportunity to change elevation. So the VTOL cannot move up and then side slip over the mountain. The crash is imminent. You can find the rules for collision damage on page 62 of Total Warfare. Up next to consider is how far a unit will side slip if it doesn't collide into anything. The answer to this question is that the unit side slips a number of hexes equal to its margin of failure on the driving skill roll. However, the max number of hexes a unit can sideslip is equal to the number of hexes the unit previously moved prior to the side slip minus 1. So let's say our hover tank moves 1, 2, and it's flanking, and then it changes facing. We make our driving skill roll. We totally failed that roll. The driving skill was 5, our roll is 3, so the margin of failure is 2. We moved 2 hexes, so that means that we can only side slip 1 additional hex, because we only moved 2, and 2 minus 1 is 1. However, if the hover tank had moved 1, 2, 3, 4, and then changed facing, and then failed the roll by a margin of failure of 2, then the unit would side slip 2 hexes. Interestingly enough, the number of hexes the unit side slips costs no MP. So after the side slipping is done, provided that collisions haven't happened and other things, the unit may progress forward, expending MP normally. If you would like to exploit this rule, I suppose you could. You could flank as fast as you can, and then to move farther, turn and hope that you side slip for even more distance traveled. Because you gotta go fast.